Kofi knew the smell before he opened his eyes. It was the sharp, earthly scent of mullein leaf and pine resin, a comforting aroma that always clung to his grandmother. But beneath it, this morning, was the coppery tang of new blood. He sat up on his straw pallet. His grandmother was already sitting on her stool by the cabin's low fire, her back to him. The rough, linsey-woolsey shirt she wore was darker in patches, clinging to the new wounds beneath. "Grandmother," Kofi whispered. She didn't turn. Her hands, gnawed as oak roots, were methodically grinding something in a small stone bowl. "Hush, child. The master's work ain't waiting for the son, and it surely ain't waiting for us." Kofi was only 8, but he understood. Grandma was in trouble again. It was always for the roots. Last week, the overseer, Mr. Davies, had found a small bundle of twisted grass and bird feathers tied to the new-sown tobacco field. A conjure, he called it, a devil's trick. Master Gideon didn't abide devil's tricks. Kofi had seen the punishments. He'd seen his grandmother forced to wear the bit for a whole day, a cruel iron contraption forced into her mouth, its metal tongue pressing down her own, held fast by a headstall. It left her mouth bleeding and her spirit silent, but it never broke her. When Master Gideon's prize mare went lame, he accused Grandma of fixing it. For that, she was locked in the hot box for 2 days, a lightless tin shed that baked like an oven in the Carolina sun. Kofi had slipped her water through a crack, his hand trembling. But the whip was the most common. Master Gideon believed it was the only word they understood. Grandma took it with a silence that seemed to enrage Gideon more than any scream. She never cried out, her eyes fixed on some distant point he could not see. That afternoon, the full heat of summer pressed down like a physical weight. Kofi was tasked with carrying water to the field hands. He saw his friend, a small, quick-moving boy named Timmy, stumble under the weight of a hoe. The iron head struck a rock, and the wooden handle snapped. The overseer's shout cut through the air. Master Gideon himself rolled over, his face purple. He didn't say a word. He dismounted, tore the shirt from Timmy's back, and uncoiled the long bull whip from his saddle. Kofi squeezed his eyes shut, but he couldn't block the sound. The wet, tearing crack followed by Timmy's high-pitched wail. It went on and on. When it was over, Timmy was a heap on the ground, and Kofi's grandma was watching. Her face was a mask of stone, but her eyes were 2 burning coals. That night, Grandma did not sleep. Kofi pretended to be asleep as he watched her move in the moonlight flittering through the cabin's cracks. She took out her stone bowl. She added red clay, a lock of her own gray hair, sulfur, and something small and dark Kofi couldn't see. She whispered words in a language that felt ancient on her tongue, words that rumbled in her chest. She crept from the cabin. Kofi followed, his heart a cold bird in his chest. He watched from the shadows as she went to the big house. With her bare hands, she dug a small hole just beside the master's front steps, buried the small leather pouch, and covered it over, patting the earth flat. A week passed. A strange tension settled on the plantation. Then, a slave named Silas, a man who always kept his eyes low and his words sweet for the master, was seen leaving the overseer's cottage. An hour later, Master Gideon rode to the cabin, his face a thundercloud. In his gloved hand, he held the mud-caked leather pouch. "Witch!" he roared, kicking the door open. He grabbed Grandma by the arm and dragged her into the clearing. "You dare bring your jungle filth to my home? You dare put your curse on me?" "I bring no curse," Grandma said, her voice clear and cold. "I only bring what is owed." Gideon struck her across the face. "You will not poison my house." He signaled to the overseer. "Ring the bell. I want every soul in this place to see what happens to a root worker." They were all forced to gather, the slaves forming a silent, terrified ring. Kofi tried to run to her, but his mother held him, her own body shaking, her hand clamped over his mouth. They didn't use the whip. The overseer threw a thick rope over the broad, low-hanging branch of the master oak tree in the center of the clearing, the tree they sometimes ate under, the tree Kofi used to climb. As they cinched the noose around her neck, Grandma's eyes found Kofi. There was no fear in them, only a deep, terrible love and a fire that promised to burn. "You cannot kill the root, Gideon," she said, her voice carrying across the silent yard. "You only plant the seed." Then she was high in the air, her body twisting. Kofi screamed into his mother's hands. The slaves were forced to stand and watch for an hour, a lesson carved into their minds. A few weeks later, the haunting began. It started small. Tools left in the shed were found broken in the field. The heavy bell in the yard rang at the stroke of midnight, its iron clang jolting everyone from their sleep. The overseer's prized bull was found dead in its pen, its eyes wide with a terror no natural beast ever showed. Inside the big house, things were worse. Doors slammed shut in empty rooms. The master's wife complained of a bitter, burning smell, like sulfur and pine, that no amount of cleaning could scrub away. Objects would fly from shelves. Cold spots drifted through the opulent rooms, cold as a grave. The slaves knew. In the quarters, they whispered. They found small piles of gray night owl feathers on their doorsteps, a sign of protection. But on the overseer's doorstep, they found a small cross made of chicken bones. He quit 2 days later, fleeing in the night. Master Gideon, however, remained blind. He blamed the new overseer, blamed the heat, blamed the slaves, carelessness. Then his family began to fall ill. His wife was first, taken by a wasting sickness that baffled the doctor from town. She shrank in her bed, her skin a pale papery gray. Then his eldest daughter, the one who had once thrown a rock at Kofi, was struck by the same affliction. She cried out in the night, swearing a dark woman was standing in the corner of her room, watching her. The slaves recognized the sickness. It was the wasting curse, the one that ate a person from the inside out, the one Grandma had known how to cure and how to cause. The master's youngest son, his prized heir, was the last to sicken. The boy was dead in 3 days, his final breath a thin wail for his papa. Gideon was broken, but his grief curdled into a terrible blind rage. He knew, on some level, that this was not natural. He could feel the unseen presence in the house, the weight of a curse pressing in, and if he couldn't fight the shadow, he would punish the living. He cut the rations in half. The slaves began to starve. He decreed that work would run from first light until long after dark, 7 days a week. The whip became a constant song on the plantation. And then, Master Gideon himself began to fall ill. It started as a dry, hacking cough that shook his entire frame. He grew gaunt, his eyes sinking in his skull, burning with a feverish, terrified light. The doctor's tonic did nothing. He was consumed by the same curse that had taken his family. One night, a terrible storm lashed the plantation, the rain hitting the earth like gunfire. Gideon lay in his massive bed, too weak to move. The house was silent, his wife and daughter dead, his son buried. The house slaves had fled to their quarters, too terrified to stay in the big house after dark. He was alone. A flicker of movement in the corner of the room. He turned his head. She was there. Grandma, not as a shadow, but as she was in life. Her feet not quite touching the floor. The rope was still around her neck. Her eyes were not eyes at all, but hollow pits of cold, white fire. "Witch!" he rasped, trying to raise himself on the elbow. "Be gone!" Her voice filled his head, though her lips did not move. It was a sound like the grinding of stones and the rustling of dry leaves. You cannot banish what you have planted, Gideon. My son! You killed my son! He choked, the cough tearing at his throat. You took my children, her voice echoed in his skull. You beat them. You sold them. You murdered them. You took Timmy's back. You took my life. You fed the ground with blood. Now the ground feeds on you. No, no, he whimpered, the last of his rage collapsing into pure animal terror. You bound yourself to this land with your greed. I have bound you to it with my root. As you bled the land, now it bleeds you dry. Your line ends here. Your name dies. She drifted closer. The smell of pine and mullein and grave dirt filled his lungs, choking him. He tried to scream, but only a wet, gurgling sound came out. The spirit of Grandma reached out a spectral hand, its fingers long and cold as roots, and laid it on his flat chest. In the quarters, Kofi stood up, awake. He heard, even over the storm, one last strangled cry from the big house, and then silence. The storm passed. When the sun arose, the slaves found Master Gideon dead. His eyes were wide open, his face a mask of horror, frozen in a silent scream. Life on the plantation did not end. It never did. The master's brother, a Mr. Harris, arrived a month later to take possession. He was a hard, practical man who scoffed at the vapors and country tales that had left the big house empty. He ordered it aired out, scrubbed clean, and moved in his own young family. For a time, the fields were quiet, saved for the familiar ring of the overseer's command. The slaves whispered amongst themselves. Had Grandma's spirit found peace? Had the debt been paid in full? One evening, Kofi was walking back from the well, the long shadows of twilight stretching from the great oak tree. He saw Mr. Harris's son, a small boy of 6, playing near the spot where his grandmother's body had hung. The boy was laughing, tossing a stick into the air. Kofi stopped, his blood turning to ice. The boy suddenly froze. His laughter died. He cocked his head to the side, as if listening to a sound only he could hear. He looked down at the earth, then stooped. His small, pale fingers began to dig in the dirt right at the base of the tree. He was digging where the rope had fallen. "Charles!" Mr. Harris's voice boomed from the porch. "What are you doing in that filth? Get on up here." The boy didn't look up. He just kept digging, his movements becoming faster, more frantic, like a dog clawing at a buried bone. "I hear her," the boy whispered, his voice a thin, reedy thing that carried on the still evening air. "She's singing." Mr. Harris's face clouded with confusion, then anger. "What nonsense is that? Get up here now." Kofi backed away slowly, his hands moving to the small, dried sprig of mullein he now carried in his pocket. He looked from the digging boy to the new master on the porch, and a cold, terrible understanding settled in his heart. He knew his grandmother was still there. She was not a spirit of justice. She was a spirit of rage, born of blood and agony, and she had become one with the land itself. She didn't just hunt the Gideons. She hunted the place. She was in the red clay soil, in the roots of the great oak, in the very dust that clung to their clothes. The curse hadn't ended. Gideon's death wasn't a payment. It was just a start. This land had been bought with unimaginable suffering, and it would demand that price from anyone who dared to call it their own. The new master, his new family, and perhaps generations yet to come, were now all just trespassers on Grandma's ground. The hunting was not over. It had only just begun.